All right, let's talk about something fascinating in theology, the idea of prevenient grace. Now, this isn't just some dry academic topic. It's actually a story about how sometimes we come up with these incredibly clever solutions to fix problems that maybe we made up in the first place. So, yeah, let's dive in and really unpack this thing.
Okay, so here's the paradox that kicks this whole thing off. If humanity is, spiritually dead, that's the term some traditions use, how can anyone possibly take that first step toward God? I mean, think about it. How can a will that's supposedly dead reach out for a lifeline? It doesn't make sense, right? Well, that's exactly the question Prevenient Grace was invented to solve.
So, to really get the cure, we first have to understand the diagnosis. And this diagnosis, which became a really big deal during the Protestant Reformation, is a concept called total inability. It's all about a very specific take on what happened to the human will after the fall. So, what in the world is total inability? Well, it's this idea from the Reformation that the fall of Adam didn't just, weaken humanity. It completely broke our will, spiritually speaking. The idea is that we are totally incapable of even taking that first baby step toward God on our own. Our will is basically just sitting there, inert, and it needs some kind of divine jumpstart to get going.
Okay, but right away, this diagnosis creates a huge logical problem. I mean, if our will is completely broken, if we're literally unable to choose good, then how can we possibly be held responsible for not choosing it? It kind of blows up the whole idea of accountability, right? And just like that, you've got a brand new theological headache.
And this is where our source material really zooms out to see the bigger picture. It points out that this isn't a one-time thing in doctrinal history. You see this pattern again and again. You start with a faulty assumption, which leads to a false dilemma, and that dilemma forces you to invent all these complicated philosophical solutions instead of just sticking with revealed truth. Which brings us right to the solution. So, faced with this dilemma of a totally broken will, theologians came up with a really clever answer. You can think of it like a theological patch, something designed to fix this broken system. And that patch, that's prevenient grace. So what is this stuff? Well, prevenient grace is basically a first step kind of grace. The idea is that it's given to absolutely everyone, universally. And its one specific job is to re-enable the will, to give it just enough of a spiritual nudge so that a person can then freely choose to respond to God. It's the divine intervention that comes before you even believe, making belief possible in the first place. And this idea didn't just pop up out of thin air. Sure, early church fathers like Augustine talked about grace coming before faith, but the specific doctrine we're talking about today, that's really a post-Reformation thing. It was first solidified by a guy named Jacob Arminius, and he came up with it as a direct response to that Calvinist idea of total inability. Later on, John Wesley, the founder of Methodism, really popularized it. The key thing to remember is it was created for one reason, to solve this very specific problem of a broken will. Now, our source has this great metaphor for it. It calls prevenient grace a logical splint. And that's perfect, right? Think about what a splint does. It doesn't actually heal a broken bone, does it? Nope. It just holds the pieces together so the whole system can keep functioning. And that's the argument here, that prevenient grace is a clever repair for a broken model, not some foundational truth that was there from the beginning. And this is the absolute crux of the argument. While prevenient grace totally works to solve the immediate problem, it makes choice possible again, which is what it's designed to do, it does it while still buying into the initial diagnosis. It still works from the assumption that, yep, the human will was broken and needed fixing. So, in a way, it's just treating the symptom, not the underlying cause. All right, so what if we just threw that whole diagnosis out the window and came at this from a completely different angle? This is where the source material introduces what it calls the restoration reframe. And this perspective doesn't even try to fix the problem of total inability. Instead, it questions whether the problem even exists in the first place. And this is the big, game-changing question. What if that whole initial diagnosis that our will was completely broken and spiritually dead was just wrong? From the very beginning, what if humanity never actually lost its core ability to choose? Well, if that's true, then the entire dilemma that needed a patch in the first place, it just vanishes. Poof. So in this restoration framework, the idea is that moral agency wasn't destroyed by the fall at all.
It was retained. This view suggests there's a universal divine influence, sometimes called the light of Christ, that's already given to everyone, kind of like an innate moral compass. So in this model, grace isn't about reanimating a dead will. It's about persuading and transforming a will that can already choose. And because of that, the whole total inability problem just never even comes up. There's nothing to fix.
Okay, so let's put these two ways of thinking right next to each other for a final comparison. On one side, you've got a system that needs a patch to work. And on the other, you've got a foundation that, according to this view, doesn't need any repair at all. And really, it all boils down to this one fundamental difference in their starting point. The whole Prevenient Grace model starts with the assumption that our agency was lost and has to be rehabilitated. But the restoration model, it starts from the idea that our agency was never lost. It was retained. And that single difference in the starting block changes absolutely everything that comes after. And you can see how that plays out here. We're talking about a completely different anthropology, a totally different way of understanding what a human being even is. And look at the bottom line for the restoration idea. The doctrine of inability is just not needed. It's completely redundant. This quote from the source just nails it, I think. The point here isn't just to offer a better answer to the puzzle of a broken will. The real goal is to show that we might have been trying to solve the wrong puzzle the entire time. If you just restore the correct frame of reference, the dilemma itself goes away. And so we come to the final verdict from the source material. It concludes that, yeah, Prevenient Grace works great as a philosophical patch. It's a clever tool designed to counteract other theological ideas. But, and this is the big but, the patch is only necessary if you accept the initial and possibly wrong assumption that our moral agency was broken in the first place. So, after all that, what's the big takeaway? It's this. Prevenient grace is a brilliant, logical, and you could even say necessary solution. But only if you accept the problem it was created to solve. If you don't accept that initial diagnosis, then the whole thing becomes a brilliant cure for a disease that was invented. And that really leaves us with one last thing to think about. When it comes to building a belief system, which is better? A really clever patch designed to fix a break? Or a foundation that was so solid it never needed a repair in the first place? That's a question worth chewing on.